everyone, welcome back to my channel. So it is a miserable rainy day on the last day of September, very autumnal. I'm wearing my warm snuggly dress and I thought this was a perfect day to cover what I have read in the last few months. Here are the books. So this is the books I've read between July and September. So I am trying to be seasonal with my reading and trying to keep like each of the quarter of the year kind of the books reflective of the season, but I'm also trying to read books that are based in other countries by authors of different nationalities, and also books that are more contemporary, as well as some older stuff in there as well. There's so many books on my list, I cannot get through them all, so this is what I've managed to crack through in the last 3 months. It's quite a summery theme, July and August being like summer months, September moves into autumn, but actually September was warmer for the most part than the summer had been, so it still got overall quite a summery feel. So the first book that I read was actually my non-fiction pick for July, which is Calling the Shots by Sue Barker. It's her like memoir autobiography, and so it was published in 2022. It was July, the tennis was on. Sue Barker was a former British tennis player and won the French Open, and then she hosted Wimbledon for 30 years. So I did a whole video on this book and I felt like I was a little bit harsh about it because I didn't really love it. I didn't love the style of writing, and I thought that the structure and organisation of the book was confusing. And I think that she kind of brushed over some potentially negative issues, especially in regards to the tennis playing side of things. But then she was quite critical of things like the BBC and how they handled her like leaving different roles, and like she also hosted Question of Sport and then got fired, and she wasn't obviously thrilled about that. But yeah, it just wasn't like my favourite book ever, but like I said, I did a whole video on it. The next book was The Summer Book by Tove Jansson. Sorry, I didn't actually look up in advance how to pronounce her name, so I apologise. But she was the author or the creator of The Moomins, but then she also wrote some more like grown-up books as well. So obviously the name and also the cover really appealed to me for a summertime book. This was published in 1972, and it's a short and kind of slightly curious book, the way that it's split into different sort of sections that don't necessarily join together into a complete narrative structure, but it is about a young girl staying with her father and grandmother on a small island, a small Danish island, for the summer. And it's, for me, a glimpse into quite a different life. Obviously it was written 50 years ago, so whether this life really still exists anymore in small Danish islands, I do not know. But it is very different to the life that I grew up in. And it also shows you the developing relationship between the young girl and her grandmother. And yeah, it was quite interesting. So I think I also did a video on this, if I can remember correctly. I have to try and link some of these things below. The next book was Swimming Home by Deborah Levy from 2011. I like Deborah Levy. Hot Milk remains my favourite, which I'm now not going to be able to find. Here it is. And also I have this one as well. So Hot Milk remains my favourite, about like a young woman, I guess a millennial, who's struggling with like her identity and what to do next in her life, as well as a few other things like her mother's illness. And then also The Man Who Saw Everything I kind of liked, but not as much as Hot Milk. And then Swimming Home, I kind of just really liked Hot Milk, so that's why I just keep reading Deborah Levy books, wanting them to be as good as that first one that I read. But yeah, it was alright. So the next one was another non-fiction book. So this was probably my non-fiction book for August, so we've moved into August now. So this is What White People Can Do Next, From Allyship to Coalition by Emma Dabiri, who is an Irish author, a black Irish author who's also spent time in America as well. So she has seen how things are in America, how things are in Ireland. She's also, I think, lived in the UK as well. So I did again a whole video on this one because it was really interesting. It's very short, but she has a lot of really thought-provoking things to say in a very short amount of time. I guess the main takeaway would be the dangers of allyship, as it can promote a kind of white saviour complex, and instead we should be focusing on or aiming for a coalition of shared interests. I'm really like massively simplifying and summarising what she says. On the back it does say, stop the denial, stop the false equivalencies, interrogate whiteness, interrogate capitalism, denounce the white saviour and abandon guilt. So that kind of sums up how the book is, like what the book is about, I guess. And yeah, I thought she was really interesting, and then she's written another book, or her previous book was called Don't Touch My Hair, and I am interested in reading that as well. So I recommend that one. And then my next one was another, oh, I didn't get this one out. Here it is. Found it. So another Celia Fremlin book. This one is called Uncle Paul. So I've read a couple of others. Oh my god. I've read a couple of her other books. The Long Shadow and The Hours Before Dawn. Really like them, especially The Hours Before Dawn. I really like her work. I only just discovered her last year. This book was written in 1960. And they don't disappoint. They are all quite similar though, so if you like them then you'll like them, if you don't then you probably won't. Uncle Paul is a psychological thriller like all of the ones are that I've read, and there's a trio of sisters that are worried about the eponymous Uncle Paul, that he might have returned after a stint in prison for murdering his first wife. Paul wasn't actually their uncle, but he was the husband of their eldest sister, Mildred. And so in Fremlin style the question is, has Uncle Paul actually returned? Is there actually danger that they should be worried about? Or is it that the sisters have just worked themselves into such an anxiety that they're actually completely wrong, and everyone around them considers them to be wrong because of their kind of emotional state? The family drama, more than the psychological element, is at the forefront, which means that it's not a super high octane thriller with lots of car chases. Also it was written in the 1960s. But I really liked that, and I liked that the cover matches my Long Shadow cover. I still am kicking myself that the Hours Before Dawn version that I got isn't one of the matching set, and I might actually buy another copy of it just to make it be a part of the matching set. So that's how much I really liked it. And then I can re-gift that other version to someone else. And then there's another book of hers that I've just seen called Appointment with Death, which has like a matching cover. So now obviously I have to get that one next. So the next book is Tin Man by Sarah Winman from 2017. So Sarah Winman is someone that I've seen because of some of her other books, but I didn't buy those. I bought this one, which is like a classic me thing to do. See an author that's really well known for one of their books and then buy a different one, usually because I buy the shorter book, because their best books are usually like chunky, you know. Anyway, I bought Tin Man and I didn't really care for it. So we move forward back in time, and the book is also split into two, so it's written from two different perspectives, which is a structure that I normally really like and I vibe with. It's about a friendship and romantic sexual relationship between Ellis and Michael, and then also Annie, who marries Ellis later on in the book. Well, we move forward back in time, so later on in their lives. The first part of the book is from the perspective of Ellis, who is now in his mid-40s and working at a kind of car repair place where he's like bashing out, tapping out dents in cars, hence him being the Tin Man of the book. I didn't really understand why he works the night shift. I didn't know that car repair places would be open at night. Is that a thing that happens? Like, I don't know. Anyway, but that's like his life. He works the night shift at a job that he doesn't really care for because he wanted to be an artist. He's in his mid-40s. He's alone after his wife Annie died, and also his best friend. They died together in a car accident 5 years ago. The second half of the book is from the perspective of his best friend, Michael. So Ellis and Michael met when they were teenagers at a difficult time in both their lives. So Ellis's mother died of cancer, I think. It was like a kind of over a longer period of time. And Michael's parents had died, or he didn't have a family, and he lived with his grandmother. They started a sexual relationship when they were younger, but then that ended. Ellis and Annie met, and they also got together. The blurb on the back says, it begins with two boys, Ellis and Michael, who were inseparable. And then the boys become men, and then Annie walks into their lives, and it changes nothing and everything. And I kind of felt like that suggests that Annie is the one that splits them up, but actually she doesn't, because their romantic relationship has already ended, and their strong friendship remains throughout the whole book. And Annie is also a bit of a non-character. Like, she just arrives, doesn't really do very much, and then she dies. I didn't get the appeal of Annie, to be honest with you. Michael is a much more interesting character, and the second half of his book goes into more detail about his life during a period of time where he isn't really close friends with Ellis. They've kind of lost contact for a few years, and he is dealing with the death of his partner from AIDS. And so that part of the book is set during like the AIDS pandemic, and that is much more interesting and honestly much more emotionally impactful than anything else I think that happened in the book. But then he dies at the end. Well, then he dies. I mean, I suppose the book starts with him already being dead. So the interesting character has died, and we're just left with Ellis, who's a bit miserable. Sorry, I'm being mean about Ellis, but I just didn't really gel with the book very much. So the next book is The Pachinko Parlor by Alyssa Scheuer-Dusepin. Sorry, I didn't Google her name either. From 2018. Where have you gone? This one. It has a fun jazzy cover. I mean, that is why I pick books, because of the covers. And you know what? It actually does work most of the time. I like this one. So a young woman called Claire has Korean grandparents, but she was born and grew up in Switzerland because her mother moved to Switzerland and met a Swiss guy. Her grandparents had to leave Korea during the war, and they moved to Japan, and they've remained uncomfortable there. They refuse to speak Japanese, but Claire has forgotten much of her Korean. So when she goes to stay with them, she's now in Tokyo with them, where they run a pachinko parlor, which is kind of like a gambling kind of slot machine type thing. She's there tutoring a young girl in French and waiting for her grandparents to plan an anticipated trip back to Korea that they just seem to be really reluctant to go on. And it turns out that actually it's Claire who needs to take the trip back to Korea, and she is struggling with her identity and learning her roots. That's just quite interesting, and yeah, I liked it. So then we move on to a non-fiction book. Yeah, so I guess I've read more non-fictions than I was realising, because I was trying to do one a month, but I've ended up with 4. July, August, September. Yeah, so I don't know. This was a non-fiction for August or September, I can't quite remember. Anyway. Fake History by Otto English. This is from 2022, so fairly recent. So this is 10 great lies from history, such as Winston Churchill was Great Britain's greatest Prime Minister, or Abraham Lincoln believed all men were created equal, and then how those lies have shaped the world subsequently. I picked this up randomly from World of Books, where you can get a lot of second-hand books, and I really wasn't expecting very much. I'm not entirely sure why I bought it, because it didn't immediately jump out at me. I thought it would be kind of dull, to be honest. I don't know why I bought it. I was pleasantly surprised, and I did actually really like it. So interestingly, the reviews on like Waterstones, when I looked it up subsequently, were really mixed, either 5 stars or 1 star. Some people are saying like it's myth busting, and then other people saying it tells you nothing new. But of course this really depends on your existing knowledge of history. So I did study history at university, which may have helped, but not necessarily the subjects that he's referring to in the book. But I never thought for a moment that Abraham Lincoln believed that all men were created equally, or that Churchill was really that great. But English, the author, shows how these lies, or the particular interpretations of events, have been used greatly as propaganda. And so I think that's really more the point of the book, is that he's talking a lot about propaganda that has been used for nationalistic purposes and why that's bad. It's going to depend on whether you share English's political leanings, which are definitely liberal, and I do. So it really worked for me. Like I said, I don't think it did any myth busting really for me, but it's quite interesting to hear and understand his interpretation of how these lies became about, and then what the subsequent impact there has been. So with like Winston Churchill and the idea that he was this amazing great prime minister who led us to victory in World War II, that has been used subsequently by people like Boris Johnson that really call on the myth of Churchill when they are doing all of their nonsense. So that's quite interesting, but yeah, it depends what you already know, it depends what your political leanings are. So the next book is The White Book by Han Kang. So this one was originally published in a date that was 2016 in Korean, 2017 in English, where it's been translated into English by Deborah Smith. I did another video on this and also just on Han Kang generally. Again, I love some of her books. So I have The Vegetarian and Human Acts, which I love and I think they're great. This book is quite different. It doesn't have a narrative structure per se, and it is just lots of different things that are white. Many of them are types of snow or ice or sleet, to be fair, which is fine. And then there are other things in there as well. And you can kind of try to work a kind of narrative or an understanding of how they all connect together, because she does also talk at various points about her eldest sibling who actually died after only a few hours of being born, which is very sad. And that's kind of, I guess, the emotional heart or pull throughout the book. But then the book isn't necessarily directly about that story, it's about things that are white. It just didn't really work for me. I much prefer the other two books. I much prefer having more of a narrative structure. Like, I don't know if this counts as being fiction or non-fiction. I'm going to say fiction. I don't know. It's things that are white. So the next one was one that I had seen recommended on the internet, and I have to say on these YouTube channels I have followed some recommendations that have been pretty good. But this one is The Shooting Party by Isabel Colgate, published in 1980, so I didn't realise it was that old when I saw it was recommended. I mean, that's fine, but I just didn't quite realise, you can kind of tell from the cover. So it does say that now a magnificent film, I assume in the 1980s, but now I'm kind of curious to actually watch the film, or I would quite like there to be like a modern version made of the film, perhaps. Instead of them just remaking Agatha Christie over and over again, I want this. So this book is actually set in October, not September as I did previously think, although I would have saved it for October because it's not properly seasonal. Just a disclaimer as to why I read it in September. It took me a little while to get into it, and it might be just because it is a little bit older, just the style of writing is a little bit different to what I was expecting and am used to with more contemporary books. There just seems to be like quite long, unbroken sections of text, and I think a more contemporary audience has a much shorter attention span. My attention span. But once I got into it, I really enjoyed it. So it's set in 1913, so it's the summer before the outbreak of World War I, and it's a group of essentially wealthy guests who have gathered together for a shooting party, so shooting birds. And I have to say, there was a lot of detail about the shooting party itself, as something that I've never really understood or known anything about, or really would have been interested in. About how they kind of, you know, the beaters come and scare the birds to get them out so that they can be shot, and how each of the guests has a loader who is someone that loads the bullets into the gun or whatever it is that they shoot. So there's actually loads of people involved in like planning and making the shooting party work. It isn't just like a couple of guys go out with a gun and shoot some birds. It's like a full-on event. and that's very much part of the book. This is like an event at a very wealthy, well-connected man's house who has hosted the King of England at one of his shooting parties previously. So there is an upstairs downstairs element, as we can see the contrast between the guests and also the staff, the shooters and their loaders who load the guns, and there's also a sense that this is the last event of this kind. World War I is looming, although the guests don't really reference that very much. We as the audience know that, and that it feels like this is the end of their way of life. Actually, the tagline that's written on the book here is, "It's 1913 and Edwardian England is about to vanish into history." And I think it just like reminds you of how big an event World War I was. Obviously, it was a major international, like global war, and lots of people died. But it also just, the structure of society was not the same afterwards, which perhaps we all forget that the 20th century saw a lot of social, political and economic changes within the country. So then there's also various personal intrigues, romances, affairs, jealousies that all ultimately lead to an accidental death at the shooting party. And so like individual death and tragedy only a few months before World War I was then to claim the lives of many, many other people. And actually there's a line at the end where so the last sort of couple of pages just kind of sum up what happened after the events of that shooting party, and it's really what happened during World War I. And there's just this line that says, "The giant fist that took the young men of that generation in its grasp somehow allowed Dan Glass to slip through its fingers. He survived the war." And that's just one character in the book. But I just have in my head now this idea of like this hand of war or something going down and like just picking up like people and men and to like kill them. And I don't know, that line has really stuck with me. And I really like this book, so now I kind of want to see this film. So nearly there, we're on to the final straight. We've just got 2 more books. So I've got this one, nice blue cover with like little buntings on, which is very cute. It's A History of the World in 21 Women by Jenny Murray. Again, this one was picked at random on World of Books, and I wasn't expecting that much from it. It is a list of 21 women, and I don't know why it's 21. I don't understand the significance of that number. It just seems like a lot to fit into one book that's not that long. You can't really go into any great depth onto any of them. So that's like my first critique, I suppose, is that she's trying to cover too many people. Yeah, it's just 21 different women. So you've got like Joan of Arc, Marie Curie, Coco Chanel, Toni Morrison, Angela Merkel, Kathy Freeman. So you've got politicians, you've got artists, you've got a sportswoman in there, you've got authors. So it covers like a range of different like careers or roles, I guess, and also through a different time period. So it starts with Pharaoh Hatshepsut, and then goes all the way up to Kathy Freeman. So it covers like a long time period, a lot of different countries, different like careers, and different women, and I guess it's just trying to cover too many things. I have to say that I've never been a huge fan of Jenny Murray. I know she does the Women's Hour on the radio, and I don't know a ton about her, but I've always just been slightly put off by thinking that she's like a fairly old-fashioned and middle-class type of feminist, and I feel like that's what you get a lot of in this book. At one point, she has a chapter on Hillary Clinton, and she talks a lot about Hillary Clinton's achievements. She was the Secretary of State. She ran for President of the United States. She was a successful lawyer. But then she also has a line in here about how Clinton knows that a handbag is a woman's most important thing and it's their life support system. And it just seems like such an awful, old-fashioned, naff thing to say, and it undermines everything else about that she's talking about Hillary. And I don't understand why. I don't understand what the purpose of that is. Also, she comments in that chapter about how Hillary Clinton's husband's infidelities have overshadowed her achievements at various points. And then she then gives an extract of an interview that she did with Hillary Clinton where she asks her about his infidelities, which just seems like a really weird way of making your point. Like, oh yeah, journalists keep focusing on her husband's infidelities instead of her achievements. And I've done the exact same thing. Here you go, here, read the interview. And she does just sort of like quote her own interviews in some of these chapters as well. It's nice to read about intelligent, interesting, successful women, but that is all we get in this book. Honestly, you could have found out almost everything in here with just a Google search of these people's names. There wasn't really anything extra added or anything specific that tied these women together apart from the fact that Jenny Murray likes them. There's just too many people in this book to really go into detail. She should have had like 4 or 5, and there should have been a much more cohesive theme that brought them together, and she should have been bringing something extra. Jenny Murray, the author, should have been bringing something extra to the book that I couldn't have just got from looking them up on Wikipedia. That being said, if you don't know anything about any of these women, it's not a bad starting point, and it's nice to, you know, for women to get some recognition, but that's about it really. And I just think that just seems like setting the bar quite low. I don't know. The last book, you'll be pleased to know, it's the end. So this one is a little shorty that I just finished reading actually this weekend, just to get it in before the end of September. So this one also was a bit of a impulse buy again on World of Books. I was just sticking things in the cart. So this is The Third Man by Graham Greene, and you also get The Fallen Idol in this version of the book. The Fallen Idol is a very short story. It's only about 27 pages, and then The Third Man is also very short. It's less than 100 pages. The Third Man's from 1950, so it is set post World War II. The Fallen Idol was published originally in 1935, so they weren't originally published together. The Third Man was the reason that I bought the book, and I've seen the film with Orson Welles a long time ago, but I do remember Orson Welles playing Harry Lime, a post-war racketeer, and seeing him standing in the shadows with his hat, shadows of post-war, and his friend Holly Martin, who's actually named Rollo in the book, arriving in Vienna to find out that Lime has actually been killed in a car accident, but then him setting off an investigation to find out what really happened and discovering some unpleasant truths about his best friend. I also remember the key speech that is on a Ferris wheel, which is really used to justify, or Lime trying to justify his black market dealings, saying in Switzerland they had brotherly love, they had 500 years of democracy and peace, and what did they produce? The cuckoo clock. It's the most famous line in the film and was written by Orson Welles himself, so it doesn't actually appear in the book. I think what I'm saying is I just like the film better. That is it. That is all the books that I've read between July and September. It's actually a pretty good stack. There are a few shorties in here, I have to admit. But yeah, that's what I've read. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please do give me a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you next time.